Hi, everyone. Welcome to the November 19th edition of the TimeformUS Pacecast. I'm David Aragona, and I'll be joined in just a second by my co-host, Craig Milkowski. This week on the podcast, we're going to take a look back at some of the stakes action from last week. There's not a whole lot of it to discuss. There were two graded stakes races that we'll touch upon, one from Kentucky, the other from California. We'll also mention some minor stakes racing that took place, different tracks like Laurel and Aqueduct, plenty of two-year-olds in action in those stakes events. And we'll also touch upon plenty of maiden breaking performances that might be noteworthy. Some two-year-olds, including one impressive three-year-old who debuted last week. Some horses that might be worth following through the winter time. And Craig, I always like this time of the year because it's sort of a transitional period in the sport. All the major racing is over for the Breeders' Cup, and we can sort of focus a little bit more on some of these up-and-coming horses that might do some damage over the winter time and into next year.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think I mentioned it last week. I actually like this time of year. It's a little bit slower from a work perspective, but it makes us do a little more work because we have easy pickings when they're running multiple grade ones. We know what we're going to talk about. And here we got to kind of look and almost handicap what we're going to talk about on the show. And it opens up your eyes to some races you might not otherwise pay a whole lot of attention to.
Yeah, I agree with that. We're going to get to some of those two-year-olds in just a second, but let's begin with one of those graded stakes races that I referenced at the start of the podcast, the Grade 3 River City. We handicapped this race on the forecast last Friday. This one took place at Churchill Downs on Saturday, and we talked about how it was one of the more wide-open stakes races of the weekend and how we were both a little bit against the horse that was last year's defending champion, Mr. Misunderstood, because it seemed like he had not been in the best form so far in 2019. He got back to one of his better races in this race. Brad Cox had a pretty good day on Saturday at Churchill Downs, and the big horse, he just came through with another good effort. He got back to one of his better races.
Yeah, he certainly ran well. To our defense, I don't think either one of us expected him to be anywhere near 9-2 in this race. So maybe that would have changed our perspective a little bit. I didn't get admissions office at all at 6-5. I think we both didn't like him either, and yeah, I think bettors just went way overboard on him. But this was a solid grade 3. The winner and the runner-up, Cullum Road, both got 120 TimeformUS speed figures. And, it's about what you expect from a grade 3. So I think that's what Mr. Misunderstood is. Real tongue twister there for me. And with the form Brad Cox is in, I guess it was probably a mistake to dismiss him.
Yeah, this race was pretty wide open, and I think it did play out that way, even though we had this horse defending his title in this spot, because coming down the stretch, there were about 6 horses stacked across the track. It really looked at the 8th pole like any one of about half of the members of the field could win the race, and Mr. Misunderstood just sort of gutted it out late. I thought admission office ran okay, but I totally agree with you about him being overbet in this spot. I mean, he just seems like a popular horse that people are assuming is going to break through one day, and it just hasn't really happened yet. This was a race that he really was supposed to win. I see that a couple of the TimeformUS pace figures are color-coded in red. I imagine that was probably kind of borderline because while the final time is slow and the fractions look slow, I think the turf course was just a little bit dead on Saturday at Churchill Downs.
Yeah, it just got a 4 on our 1 to 10 scale, so it was definitely a bit off. And when I'm analyzing a race for pace personally, I tend to put more stock into if the early pace fractions are in red, more so than the late. So this one, I would say it's certainly a solid pace, but I'm not going to upgrade front runners too much in here or knock the closers. I just think it was more of an honest pace than really fast.
All right, let's move on to talk about some of those two-year-olds because we had a couple of impressive maiden winners on Saturday at Churchill Downs and one from Sunday. 2 races prior to the River City, we saw Mr. Monomoy, who is the younger half-brother to last year's champion, 3-year-old filly Monomoy Girl. She's by Tapazar. This one's by Palace Malice. He won his second start here at Churchill Downs, going the 6.5 furlongs. He had lost his debut at Keeneland, but had a bit of a trip that day, kind of getting outrun in the early going and doing some making a late close at the end of the race, passing some tired horses. But he was much more professional in this start, showing speed that he hadn't displayed before, and he won off pretty impressively.
He did. Another winner for Brad Cox. I got to be honest. I didn't watch this race live nor the next maiden race we're going to talk about, but I have watched the replays. But watching social media, I thought this was going to be a big number race, just the way people were talking about him, and he certainly won easy enough. but he only got a TimeformUS speed figure in 94 here, so not something I'm going to get overly excited about. Now, these are 2-year-olds. It doesn't mean that he's going to run a 94 next time. Maybe he'll run a 110, and he certainly showed plenty of talent, but I don't have the same excitement that I saw some others expressing with this win. I think it might be a little bit dressed up based on the competition he faced, which doesn't appear to be much.
Yes, he was 4 to 5 in this race for a reason, I think, because there just wasn't a whole lot of competition for him in this race. Although I will say he did it well. He's obviously bred to go the 2 turns. He finished up like a horse that's going to have no problem with extra distance. He's certainly bred to handle more ground, being a son of Belmont Stakes winner Palace Malice. So I think he's one that you can be excited about for the future, but I don't want to overhype this one performance, as you were alluding to, because it just wasn't as fast as some others that we're going to talk about on the speed figure scale. And personally, I was a little bit more impressed by the other 2-year-old that won on Saturday at Churchill Downs in the final race of the day, Swiss Skydiver for Ken McPeek. Ken McPeek is not a guy that always has his 2-year-olds cranked up to win first time out. Obviously, this one had been training well because she was bet down to be 7-2 for her debut in this spot. And I liked everything I saw from this horse. I mean, she broke about a length slowly. She was behind in the early going. It seemed like she was kind of climbing on the backstretch, not reacting well to that kickback, but she steadily advanced through the field, in between horses, angling out. And I love the way that she drew off in the stretch in a field that was really strung out across the finish line.
Yeah, this was a good effort. As you said, Ken McPeek's my big angle here. He doesn't usually have his horses cranked up first time out. And I'm assuming he probably didn't hear either. This filly probably surprised him a bit. I'll be interested to see where she shows up. If she'll be going long next time, maybe even trying turf. I looked up her pedigree. Some of her siblings have done well on the turf. Horse Miss Hot Legs. So this one definitely has a future. She got a 96 for the effort, so a couple points higher than Mr. Monomoy at a half furlong longer. So I'm with you. I think this is a filly to watch as we move into the 3-year-old season.
Yeah, and she just from a physical standpoint, she looks like a pretty imposing kind of 2-year-old. Just coming through the stretch, you could see she kind of towered over her foes. So she definitely has that physical maturity leg up on some of her rivals at this point, and we'll see if that translates into next year. I do see that the track at Churchill Downs on Saturday is color-coded as light blue in the TimeformUS PPs, indicating sometimes that horses that were closing had a slight advantage. This particular race, I don't think it played out that way because behind Swiss Skydiver, the race really held together from a pace standpoint. I didn't look in detail at some of the other races on the card, but I think that's something you do want to note.
Yeah, definitely. I haven't looked that close either. It's an algorithm we use, and it's just telling us that speed didn't do as well as we would have expected based on the odds, the horses in the race and such. But I do generally look these things over early in the week and kind of form my own opinions and make notes in our PPs. So I don't just go by the color code alone. I do try to formulate my own opinion on them.
We saw another 7-furlong debut winner, a 2-year-old filly race on Sunday, or 2-year-old colt, I should say, race on Sunday at Churchill Downs. And I'm going to try to get this name out. I believe it's Sha Shake Me Up, who won the 4th race on the card for Keith DeSormo. It seems like Keith DeSormo's had a small string in Kentucky recently, and this one has been training in Kentucky for the entirety of the fall season. And he made his debut at Churchill on Sunday and broke from the rail, which is not always the easiest thing to do, especially with a 2-year-old that's going to show some speed. And this one was rushed up by James Graham and took a challenge from the favorite on the far turn, just put that foe away and drew off by 5.5 lengths. I thought this one also looked pretty good.
Yeah, I was impressed by the rail. As you said, you don't often see these horses that first time out are able to break cleanly from the inside. He wasn't even that clean. He just kind of used the speed to get that early lead, faced a little challenge, and I thought he ran well. He got 100 TimeformUS speed figure, which is the best of the 3 2-year-olds we've talked about. Not sure he looked more like a sprinter to me, not positive. You're the breeding guy. I rely on your opinion in a lot of these efforts, but just watching the race, I got the impression that this horse is one that will probably do his best work sprinting. But again, these are 2-year-olds, so you never really know.
Yeah, it's hard to say. I believe this one is a son of Shackelford, although he doesn't look like a lot of the other Shacklefords that I've seen. So we'll see where he goes from here. But again, Keith DeSorma was not a trainer that typically has runners cranked up to win their debuts. I believe his percentage is actually pretty low with first-time starters. So we'll see if this one improves in the future, because I think all three of these horses that we saw break their maidens this past weekend have the potential to be stakes horses down the line if they improve just a little bit. Speaking of stakes horses, let's move to an actual stakes race that took place at Del Mar on Saturday. One of the two graded stakes from this past weekend, the grade 3 Bob Hope going the 7 furlongs. And pretty short field here. Bob Baffert had the horse that was going to be the heavy favorite, but scratched him and instead went with his second stringer, High Velocity, another debut winner. And he more than amply filled in as he put away his main rival to win this race. Not the strongest fig in the world, but I think the pace had a lot to do with that.
Yeah, I don't know what to make out of this race. We have all the fractions in blue. It was only a 4-horse field. The TimeformUS speed figure was a 95, while the final time figure was a 103, which is respectable, but it just shows you how slow the pace was. The race basically turned into a merry-go-round. So when I evaluate these horses, I'm probably just going to look at this one as more of a paid workout and kind of look at other efforts before I judge them too harshly on this one.
Yeah, I'm sure this horse will get bigger tests down the line. I would imagine Bob Baffert has some pretty ambitious plans for him, given his breeding. He's definitely bred to stretch out in distance. He's by quality road. His dam was a stakes-placed router going, I believe, as far as 1 1/8 miles. So you would imagine this one is going to be on the Derby trail eventually for Bob Baffert. And I don't know how much we learned about him in this race, because he actually just repeated his debut figure. And as you said, the pace was slow and all of that. Yeah, I'm not going to put too much stock in this race, but I'm also not going to write this horse off based on this one relatively slow winning speed figure. Another Bob Baffert 2-year-old that we saw earlier in the week on Thursday was one that actually won on the turf, which is a pretty rare thing for Bob Baffert, notwithstanding just his 2-year-olds across the board. He rarely wins turf races, especially sprints. And this horse, Speedy Justice, won his debut going the 5 furlongs on the Del Mar course. And he looked pretty good. I love the way this horse was striding through the lane. I mean, once he got set down, he really opened up on this field in the blink of an eye.
Yeah, he did. When I saw this horse taking a lot of money, it kind of caught my eye as just being a Bob Baffert, as you mentioned, on turf. But I suspected he would run well given the action, and sure enough, he did. He got out there. He faced pressure early. He handled it pretty easily and just drew off through the stretch. And as you say, the visual impression he gave running through the lane was that he was a horse who could have kept going for a while. He looked really good. He got a 96 TimeformUS speed figure. It was a full 7 lengths. Back to the runner-up, who only got a 78. Again, I don't think he faced the strongest competition in here, but the second choice in here, Too Late, had run a pretty quick race last time, and he's the one that he battled with early and was able to put away. So overall, I think this was probably a pretty good effort.
Yeah, this is one of those situations where I care a little bit more about the margin of victory than the speed figure, because it's very rare to see any horse at any level winning a turf sprint by as much as 7 lengths or more than that. It typically signifies that there's a horse of some quality winning the race, or that there was nothing else of quality in the field. We'll see which of those is actually true. But just from the visual standpoint, as you were saying, this horse was really striding out well and kind of gave the vibe of one that probably wouldn't mind a little bit more ground if he actually got it, especially given the way that he relaxed in the early going for the first quarter mile. So this is one to follow, because Bob Baffert doesn't typically win with these turf horses, but he apparently has one that's pretty good. Also on the Thursday card at Del Mar, just touching upon one of the older horses, we saw a name from the past, 3-5 India. Looking back through this horse's PPs, I mean, it seems like it wasn't that long ago, but in 2016, he was in Chad Brown's barn as a 3-year-old, and he achieved some graded stakes placings. I believe he was third in the Gallant Bob at Parks on Pennsylvania Derby Day many years ago. He ran in the Cigar Mile as a 3-year-old. He's had some ups and downs since then, but now he's in the barn of Peter Miller, making his second start off the claim here. He's now 2 for 2 for the new stable, and he showed a lot more speed this day, just went gate to wire and looked pretty good doing it.
Yeah, he sure did. He got a 117 TimeformUS speed figure. He was claimed for 40,000 by Peter Miller, and his last 2 have just been romps. And I think he's probably the most interesting horse of the weekend from the older horses, because he looks like a horse ready to jump back in the stakes competition. And from what we saw from the Breeders' Cup and the late season stakes out in California, the sprint division is certainly not overly tough. It's not the best they've had out there by any stretch of the imagination. So this is a horse who could probably move up and challenge in stakes right now based on these last two efforts.
Yeah, I was just going to make that point, actually. Typically, you'd say that horses that just ran speed figures like 113 and 117 against Allowance Company would have to improve further to really contest graded stakes races and be major competitors in races like that. But as you said, I mean, the dirt sprint division in California just has been kind of lacking in quality recently. I mean, especially without a horse like Omaha Beach or Chancellotte, that won the last grade one that we saw out there before the Breeders' Cup. They're not really West Coast they're not really true sprinters that are based on the West Coast. So outside of them, I mean, we just didn't see a whole lot of quality in this division. So it's definitely there for the taking if somebody wants to step up and be dominant. And maybe it could be 3-5 India if he continues on this progression. Let's move over to Aqueduct because they ran a couple of New York bred stakes over the weekend, both for the 2-year-olds. And I think we saw some quality performances in them. We'll begin with the one on Saturday for the fillies, the Key Sense. And Big Q for Gary Gullo as a filly that had won her debut at Saratoga a few months ago. They tried open company with her during the summer. It didn't quite work out. She was coming in off a bit of a layoff here, but she really took a nice step forward, running a pretty respectable speed figure for this level. Importantly to discuss, I think, is her trip, where she was sort of forwardly ridden early, which hadn't been her style previously, and she stayed out of the kickback, which has been really important at Aqueduct lately, and I think that helped her achieve success in this race.
Yeah, she ran a nice 102 speed figure. She ran a 93 a couple starts back in the Adirondack. And then I'm not really sure what happened last time. She didn't do much running at all. Got only a 74 that day, but she rebounded nicely. And if you were able to predict she could run that 93 or better, she was certainly a contender in here. She definitely took advantage. I haven't watched Playtone's trip to know how much kickback he took in this race, but just reading the chart in the comments, that's one that she'll certainly see better trips in her career just based on ground loss and the amount that she lost. So I was curious what you thought of her trip.
Yeah, I mean, I liked Playtone a lot coming into this race, and I don't want to make too many excuses for a horse that I thought had potential coming in, but I do think she ran well. She probably was never beating Big Q, given how dominant Big Q was, but Playtone definitely didn't get the right trip over the track, because I know we had talked about this race on the forecast last week and how on paper there wasn't a ton of speed, but it was one of these races where a lot of the riders had the same idea, sensing that situation, and they all sent out, and Playtone, who is one of the horses that had speed, just broke a little bit flat-footed, and she kind of got outrun in the early going, had to take a ton of dirt down towards the inside, split horses on the turn. She again showed some of those greenness tendencies in the lane, but I think that probably was due to the trip that she had. So you'll see better from her in the future, especially if the track profile changes at Aqueduct. But I think each of the top two runners in this race are pretty good and will make their presence heard from in some of the races down the line. And Craig, I just want to give you props because I do think in retrospect that Adirondack fig you gave has been somewhat validated, and Big Q definitely helps to validate that a little bit, because I know that was a tough call for you, and I definitely wasn't on board with it at the time, but I think you could say in retrospect that it has kind of worked out, that it was a faster race than maybe the clock would have suggested.
Yeah, I've been tracking that one, and it was a close call for a little while, but you got to take your time with these 2-year-olds. For one, they just don't run back as often, so you got to give it some time for that reason. And two, they'll throw in clunkers every now and then, like the Big Q did last time out, and but that doesn't mean that you can write them off right away. So I think it's a pretty solid number looking back, and appreciate you saying so.
Moving on to the Colts, on Sunday, we saw the Notebook Stakes, again going the 6 furlongs for the 2-year-olds at Aqueduct. And Dream Bigger, no surprise that this horse won. He was bet down to 4-5. Like, he couldn't lose this race. It looked a little bit more competitive to me on paper, but it didn't really play out that way. Because obviously Dream Bigger had run well in all 3 of his prior starts, and just seemed like he maybe took another step forward here, because you could tell this horse was going to win basically every step of the way. Jose Ortiz just had a ton of horse underneath him coming around the far turn. The pace was relatively fast, but he was obviously doing it very easily, and he just drew off in the stretch. The race even kind of fell apart behind him, but didn't matter.
Yeah, and he got a nice 109 TimeformUS speed figure for the race. He's run 100 or more in all 4, actually 103 or more in all 4 of his career start. So he is a serious 2-year-old. I suspect they're going to keep him sprinting because that looks like he wants to do, and he's certainly very good at it. I mean, his only losses came to Harris Bay, who he demolished in this field, and Tiz the Law, who is one of the top 2-year-olds in the country. So this horse is not only a very good New York bred, he's probably just a very good 2-year-old who could compete in open stakes company.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think this performance maybe indicates that he's moving in the right direction heading it late into the year, whereas some others who are precocious early on don't always continue that progression later on. But I think this horse is actually doing very well right now. And I also want to give a quick shout out to Silly Key, who closed to be second for Linda Rice. This horse was a preposterous 23-1. He didn't seem to be that price based on his form, but he showed a new dimension in this race, closing from well off the pace, coming through inside, which is not something that we saw a lot of horses doing from the back of the pack over the weekend at Aqueduct. So I think this one really ran well to take a shot at Dream Big or Late. He was decidedly second best. I don't want to suggest he was anywhere near best in this race, but he's another one that I think you want to follow out of this race.
Yeah, he got a nice 100. He got a nice 100 in here. And, one thing I want to note with these 2-year-olds is we give running styles, and most of these early season 2-year-olds are going to come in with running lines up near the front end. But when you get in a stakes race like this, they all can't be there. So you got to kind of look for the horses that maybe can adjust and change their styles a little bit. And I think that's always a promising thing when you see that with a horse like Silly K.
Yeah, I don't think it's that uncommon because often when these horses make their debuts, the idea is to just get them to show as much gate speed as possible, because the last thing that you want to have happen in one of these early season maiden races is to break slowly, because that typically gives horses a bad experience. But as you were saying, sometimes we see these running styles develop over time to suit a horse's strengths rather than just doing what they need to do to win first time out. And I think that's probably what happened with Silly Key, especially considering when he's going out for Linda Rice, who doesn't always have horses ready to show all their cards in their first start. Let's move on to Laurel, where we're going to discuss some more 2-year-old action. 2 races that were run back-to-back on Saturday were the James F. Lewis for the Colts and Geldings and the Smart Halo for the fillies. These are both, again, 6-furlong dirt races. The James Lewis was a pretty fast race. We talked about this one on the forecast last week, and there being many contenders in this spot. The winner I thought was a little overbet, Newstone. I mean, I kind of made a case for him thinking he'd be a middling price. They bet him down to favoritism in this spot. I thought he ran well. The rail didn't turn out to be that detrimental because the pace didn't develop as much as I think we thought it would. And he came through inside to get the job done. I did think the runner-up, the maiden that you liked, Informative, ran very well to be second.
Yeah, he did. He gave me a thrill there for a while, and I actually cashed out a little on this one with the exact. Thanks to your talk on the one, but not near as much as had the 3 gotten up. That said, this is a race I actually do want to time from video because it does really stand out as fast compared to all the races before and after. And I'm really leery to just arbitrarily knock down a 2-year-old race or early season 3-year-old race because these horses do get really good and they can get really good fast. But in this case, it's just a matter of so many horses in this brand career tops that I'm a little leery that use GPS timing at Laurel, which is just not as precise as the beam system. So, I just want to say I will be taking another look at it. It could very well be that the figure's legit and it's just a really good group of 2-year-old sprinters, and that's what I went with initially. News to me got a 108 TimeformUS speed figure, which is quite a bit faster than what the fillies were going to talk about here shortly. So if that figure holds up, the top 3 or 4 in here ran very, very well.
Yes, apparently it is news to me. That just dawned on me. That is news to me.
Oh.
I've been saying that horse's name wrong all along. But I agree. He ran pretty well. It is an oddly fast figure. I agree with you. I was wondering about that, and I was going to ask about it. But these are 2-year-olds, and they can improve at this time of year. And it seemed like a group that had some quality to it. So I guess I wasn't totally shocked that it might have come up a fast race. But I agree. It's one that you probably do want to verify. Not the fastest race in the Smart Halo, the Philly version of the James Lewis. And I guess that's not a huge surprise because based on the running lines coming in, it didn't seem like there were a ton of talented horses in here. I do think the pace had something to do with the fact that the final time was so much slower, though, because the pace really did develop in this spot as they went pretty quickly up front. They just strung out across the track coming to the quarter pole. The runner-up Lucky Trinity went pretty wide coming into the lane, and the race just totally fell apart at the end. I mean, even the third place finisher, the long shot still alive, coming around the far turn, it looked like she was going to get nothing, and then she ended up finishing third because all the speeds just evaporated.
Yeah, this was a complete pace meltdown, in my opinion. All our fractions are coded in red. I see the winner, just looking at the chart, had a 121 pace figure after the opening quarter mile, and she was fifth, 4 lengths behind. So the leader had a 145. That was the former Wesley Ward trainee, Let's Stay Positive, who just went out there winging, which shouldn't be a surprise. And she actually got the best figure in the field at a 94 compared to a 92 for the winner. So if the result didn't tell you it was a pace meltdown, the figures will.
Yeah, totally. And I'm not sure that I really want any of these horses moving forward, just given how slow the race was overall. I agree with you about Let's Stay Positive. She probably ran better than it might seem based on where she finished. Then again, you know, a 94 TimeformUS speed figure for stakes horses at this level, nothing to write home about. So I'd be a little bit more optimistic about the horses that we saw in the James Lewis rather than the Smart Halo fillies, but we'll see how they do in the future. I do want to mention one other race from this past weekend at Laurel, race earlier in the card on Saturday. Now, this is not a 2-year-old. This is a 3-year-old. Benintendi made his debut and won. When I watched this race, I kind of figured it was not going to get the biggest TimeformUS speed figure because you could tell that the pace was extremely slow, and those races just never come up that fast on the TimeformUS speed figure scale, given how we kind of detract from horses that set slow paces, especially in the dirt sprints. But watching this race, you could tell this horse has a ton of quality.
Yeah, and personally, I tend to look at the final time figure in these races, particularly for young maidens that are trying things for the first time. And this first-time starter actually ran a 109 final time figure on our number. So it was a 101 overall, which is nothing to sneeze at. But as you said, this is a late debuting 3-year-old. I don't think there was a lot of competition in here. His main competition was a horse named King Nikia, who was antsy in the gate, didn't break particularly well, and then was his closest pursuer. So I don't know what he beat in here, but visually it was a very good effort. And I kind of actually like when these younger horses rate early and finish fast like this one did. I prefer that much more than the horses that just fly and hang on late for future prospects. So I was pretty impressed by Benintendi.
Yeah, and this horse didn't just finish fast. I mean, he was absolutely flying through the stretch. I mean, when you see a TimeformUS pace figure line that's 87, 87, 109, I mean, you would have thought that horse was rallying from way back in the pack into a slow pace. I mean, obviously the pace was slow for a leader to draw away and get that kind of pace figure line, but for a horse to jump 22 points from the penultimate pace figure to the final time figure is something you just really don't see. And when you look at the fractions of this race, you can understand why. I mean, he ran his eighth of a mile from the half to the 5 furlong pole in almost 11 seconds flat. You just don't see that on the dirt, even on days when the track is playing fast. And the track really wasn't playing that fast at Laurel on Saturday. And you could see it from a visual standpoint watching this race. As soon as Sheldon Russell set him down, I mean, this horse just lengthened his stride and it looked like he was doing running one of those 2-year-old sales workouts. Like he just jumped in at the quarter pole, literally. He really finished well. And it's going to be interesting to see if he goes on in distance. I mean, he is bred to be more of a sprinter. His dam is actually a grade 1 winning sprinter, Nanny Sweep. One of the half siblings did go a little bit farther. But he seems like a horse with some real quality for Brittany Russell.
He did. And you mentioned the 87 to a 109. He did. This was just a 5.5 furlong race. So he did that in a furlong and a half. So it's not like he went from it was a 7 furlong race where he had 3 furlongs to do it in such a short time. Just emphasizes how fast this horse was coming home.
And we're going to discuss a pretty similar situation in the final race we're going to touch upon in this podcast at Woodbine on Sunday. I believe this was the second race. Now, this is a 2-year-old going just 5 furlongs over the synthetic track up there. But Clayton put in a similar effort to Benintendi in that he rated, this time behind horses, but rated behind some relatively slow fractions early. But once this horse got into the clear at the quarter pole, he really sprinted home well. And for a 2-year-old, it seems like he's going to earn a pretty impressive debut figure.
Yeah, I don't have the official number for this. My partner in California does Woodbine, and it's not an easy one to make. I kind of rough looked at it, and I say it's going to be between the 105 and 111 range. So whatever he comes up with, it's going to be fast. He knows Woodbine better than I do for sure. But I did watch a replay of this, and I mean, this horse didn't break particularly well. He kind of was in between horses, and he tucked in behind a couple battling leaders, and he looked like a seasoned horse. He was a little green through the lane. It looked like it took him a little while to change lanes, but this horse ran a fast race and looked like he had a really high cruising speed, which I liked. He might have won by even more if he wasn't just patient behind those two horses, and I thought the patience that he showed will be a big asset going forward.
Yeah, I agree with that. I love when horses rate and really finish first time out. And the fact that he rated behind horses, peeled out and passed them with a turn of foot like that, I think that really does bode well for his prospects down the line. It's always difficult to know where these horses that are so impressive on synthetic surface are going to go in the future. Looking at his pedigree, I guess it's a little bit more turfy. I mean, there's a little bit of turf in the second generation on the dam side. He's a son of Bodemeister. That sire influence can really go either way with regard to dirt or turf. So we'll see where he goes in the future. But this was definitely a step in the right direction, a big step in the right direction for a horse just making his debut. Definitely one that I'll want to follow down the line. So Craig, I enjoyed talking about all these 2-year-olds with you, and I think we highlighted a lot of horses that if you haven't checked out these replays of some of these horses we mentioned, definitely go back and look, because I think a lot of these are ones that we'll hear from in stakes races a little bit later on. We're going to continue probably with the theme of some minor stakes races through the following week. I was just looking at the New York stakes schedule. I think they're running the Red Smith, that grade 3 event for the turf marathoners on Saturday. I haven't looked at the other big races that they're running this weekend, but I think we're still a couple weeks away from some of the big 2-year-old action and the Cigar Mile. So we'll talk about all of that in the future. But Craig, glad to talk about these races with you. We'll be back on the TimeformUS Forecast on Friday. As always, you can listen to both of these podcasts on dref.com, Spotify, iTunes, YouTube, or SoundCloud, wherever you get your podcasts. Just subscribe to the Daily Racing Form channel. Thanks for listening this week, and we'll be back again on Friday.